You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Well, happy Friday night, folks. Welcome to the program. This is Scotty Roberts. I'm your host, and you're listening to the Intrepid radio program, the rare to be found, not often broadcasting these days, Intrepid radio program. And I want to thank you for taking your time to come on over here and listen to me talk tonight. And, well, you're actually watching as well, because this is broadcasting only on my YouTube channel. And that's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts, for those of you who don't know where you are. And I want to wish you all a Merry Christmas. It's about a week away now, and I've worn my extra special red nose tonight. And just to let you know, my red nose, it's like a thermometer. It goes up and down, depending on, I think, all different kinds of bodily things going on. And with the little heart stuff I had going on this week, and the angiogram and the angioplasty and all of that wild stuff with my heart, my nose got really red this week. So, you'll have to just chalk it up to my being either Santa Claus in private, or I'm going to lead a team of reindeer sometime in the near future. I'm morphing like, what was the movie? The Santa Claus with Tim Allen, where he gradually turns into Santa. Maybe that's what's going on. Gradually turning into Rudolph. And so let me know if the sound is okay. We haven't broadcast in over a month. We did that one Sunday morning show maybe about a month or 6 weeks ago. And so just keep me posted, those of you who are here. And I just want to say hey to everybody. Matthew Sainsbury, good to see you. Season's greetings. And wishing you a Merry Christmas coming up. And Leslie Holker, good to see you as always. I appreciate your presence here. I appreciate all that you've done for this program. And thank you for hanging on. Thank you for still being here. Doug Stack, good to see you, brother. You were on a drive to Arkansas. I don't know if that meant for this show or for some other time, but welcome. Steve Clark, good to see you, brother. So I'm glad that you're here. And Michelle Canham-Free, good to see you. I see you most days just on social media. It's good to see you. Susie Q, how you doing? Good to see you. Barbie D, good to see you as well. And I'm just going through the list here. Delaney Pearl Jones, good to see you. Neil Parkinson. I always say Niall because we spell it differently over here. It's all spelled, the Americanized is Neal, and you're Niall. And I always see the I, and my brain wants to say Niall. So Niall, welcome to the program, and Merry Christmas to you over there in Ireland. So good. Sound and visuals are fine. That's good to hear. And so let's go on. Matt Finn, Master Finn, good to see you. Glad you're here tonight. And it's an average day here at my house, here on my end of things. We're going to tell some ghost stories tonight, maybe focus on one, and it's one in particular. And I want to get your feedback. And I know, oh, and by the way, I know Ryan Gale is here, and he is really instrumental in why I'm going to be telling you this particular story tonight. And I'll get into all that as we go on. And Remeldian, good to see you here tonight as well. Let's see, is there anybody I've missed so far that's over in the chat room? Field Guy, I see that you are here as well. Good to see you. I'm glad you're here. And who else we got? I saw Roger Rabbit way early on. And who else? Somebody else was in here very early on. And, all the early messages disappear once the show goes live. So I'm sorry I can't go back and see some of the people who were chatting in here prior to the show starting. But welcome. Tracy. Tracy was here earlier. If you're still sitting out there, welcome to the show. And I will do my best. I don't have any reason I can't keep up with the chat room tonight. So will be a casual show tonight because this is broadcasting nowhere other than on my YouTube channel. And I want to thank you all for being here. And there's something, I didn't really address very well other than personally with some people. The last live Intrepid radio show we did, I had Ruben Fasthorse and Neil Parkinson on. And we were all talking about different things. And then the next day, some things arose, and I needed to pull the plug on the show for a while. And I want everybody to know, especially Neil, since you're here, this had nothing to do with you or any negative or old crap from the past. None of that played into that show. Nothing with Ruben. There was just some personal things. And I tried to put up an explanation the next day on my Facebook for those who were able to see it. And so we just needed to take a hiatus for a while. And I'm still on that hiatus, and it's good because I'm quite busy over here. Been doing a lot of illustrating. Those of you who keep up with my social media have seen a lot of the illustration work I've been doing for children's books and things like that. I'm working on, so right now, let's see, I just finished the Gingerbread Kids for a client in Australia. I have upcoming, and it's probably not going to hit till January, February, is an alphabet book that is hieroglyphics to alphabet, English alphabet. And it's done by some people in Australia. And that's not coming up until probably January or February. So that's going on. I've had all kinds of little projects going on the side, logos and things like that. I also have another book that I've been hired to do, which is going to focus around this ghost story I'm going to tell tonight. And we'll probably get into some other stories as well. But, on top of that, I've still got my archaeology, how to be an archaeologist book going on. And in the background of all of that is, of course, finishing the 10 Breaths of Ra, working on the book of Enoch for my publisher, and a couple of other things. So the hopper is full. And so it's a good time to be on hiatus. But I will tell you this. While I can give you no details, I'm under kind of a... It's an unofficial. I didn't sign anything, but I am under my word to not say anything about the details of this. Suffice it to say, the Intrepid radio program, whether it resurrects as the Intrepid radio program or as something else completely, is not gone forever. I'm working with some people very passively in the background. We've had some great conversations, and there's actually a couple of different places that have approached me to bring the show on live again. And so if you like the show, if you missed the show, it's going to be back in one form or another. Probably not as, how was I going to say this? It's not going to be the same show, but it'll be the same show. And it's probably not going to be in the very near future. It's going to be after the new year for sure, which is frankly only a couple of weeks away anyway. But sometime soon, I'll be making some announcements as soon as we firm up some details. So I think this show will be back in good form at the right time when it's supposed to be done. So thanks. And so everybody, thanks for being here. Thank you for showing up. It's like the old regulars are all back for the show tonight, and I sure appreciate that. I just said to Rainey today, I said, I'm going to do a show tonight. And to some of you, let me put in a disclaimer here. Maybe to some of you, this particular story is going to seem a bit self-serving because it is a book that I have been hired to produce, and there's a little more detail to that. I'm going to tell you this. Ryan Gale, who is in the chat room, he had contacted me about a month ago and said, hey, you ought to write a book on this topic. And I said, well, why don't you write that? And he said he's in a non-compete with his own company. He can't write these things. And so I went ahead and said, I'll write the book. Like the archaeologist book, it is a book that is patterned like a children's book, but it's not a children's book at all. And you'll be able to tell. It's only a children's book in the sense that perhaps older children could read it and enjoy it. It's going to be a picture book. It's going to be fully illustrated by me. And I'm also writing the text. Ryan is acting as my technical advisor and friend on this book, so I'm bouncing some things off of him. And it all comes from this book. And I did not have this book in my hands when we started the process, but I bought it as we went on. And it's a book by Will Bird, called Ghosts Have Warm Hands. And there's something about that in this story. And this is the story we're going to tell tonight. And I'm going to actually tell the story by reading for you some of the text I've written for this book. Now, you know me. I'll be working on a book and I'll read you excerpts. But there's a little method to my madness here. As I have done with the archaeologist book, I want to kind of whet your appetites for this book that we're working on now. Because we're also trying to form a little publishing company that will publish these types of books throughout the year. Not on a grandiose scale, but we're working toward that end. And so I wanted to let you know that this book is going to be available when it's done. Once it's done and published, I'm in the middle of it right now. I'll just give you a little hint. Some of you may have seen this on my social media, but as we were pitching this book, these are some of the storyboards that we did that go along with this book. I'm not going to show you too much of that, just to show you that this is the process that we went through as we proposed this book and started putting it together. And let me give you a little history of this before we get into the ghosts. And I know that Niles said he's particularly interested in this ghost story. Now, the first thing I want to tell you is that the fun of writing this particular book is that it hits two very salient details about who I am and the things I'm interested in, which make it an even more fun book to produce than anything else. And that is history, and that is ghosts or the paranormal. And when you can find those two things blend, this story, the book is not about his ghost story, but it includes his ghost story. And that's the section I'm going to read for you tonight. But his book, the idea for this book originally came from this. This fellow right here, Will Bird, World War I soldier. He's Canadian. He was part of the 42nd Battalion, which is the Black Watch. Now, you've heard me talk about my reenacting days, living history. We did the Black Watch. He was the kilted Black Watch 42nd Regiment back in the 1700s. Well, this is still the same unit, if you will. It's still the Black Watch. And it's still alive and well today. And in World War I, Will Bird joined the Black Watch in Canada, the Canadian version. And so this is about a story. The original story and idea for the book came because while he was in World War I, he was clearing trenches, and they were putting up barbed wire at Vimy Ridge. And if you remember that song that we've played on this show before about Vimy Ridge, done by Tanglefoot, this was a battle in World War I in France, and while he was at Vimy Ridge, while all back that up. Vimy Ridge is where the ghost story takes place. This was at Amiens, France, and what happened at Amiens, France, and this was the build-up to the end of the war. But at Amiens, the Canadian forces, it was a great day for the Canadian forces because all four of their battalions, all four of their units, if you will. They all converged on this site. And, I might be mixing up Vimy Ridge with this, so I won't get into so much of the history on that. Let's stick to Will Byrd. He was at Amiens. They were clearing trenches. And after the battle was over, which was a decided victory for the Allies and a decided hit for the Germans, this was really the lead up to the end of their ability to fight any longer. They're going through the trenches, and Will Byrd finds, sticking out of the mud and clay, an old sword. And this sword, he picks it up and looks at it. He brings it to some specialists, I think when he's back home, and it's an old Roman gladius. And this Roman gladius, and you've seen the sword. I don't have a picture of it or one handy. I have an old replica of one somewhere. But it was the shorter sword, and it had the handle with the rounded pommel on it. And it was the typical Roman short sword that was used for 600 plus years, one version or another of it in the Roman Empire. And this particular sword, when he brought it in, the archaeologists look at it, specialists, they dated it to around the period of Caesar's Gallic Wars in Europe. And the Gallic Wars took place roughly 58 or 59 BC down to 51 BC. So you're talking 50 years for reference point before the time of Christ. And Julius Caesar was leading his armies into France, Gaul, I think Germany at the time as well. And they were trying to subdue the Gallic people. And so this is when the sword comes from. Now, the thing about this is that this sword, all they could do was date it by all certain criteria. It's in a museum now in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And this sword, they couldn't find out anything else about the sword. They didn't know who it belonged to. They didn't find other swords or other weaponry. They didn't find that there had been a big battle right there, or they couldn't. They knew battles had taken place there. There was a town there called Samaro Briva. That is what Julius Caesar called this, because it was the place on the river with a bridge where this is, and that's where Amiens is today. And in the 1300s, I think there was a cathedral built there. There have been several battles over the centuries that have taken place there. But this is where Will Byrd is when he finds this sword. And the specialists, the historians, the archaeologists, they couldn't find any background for this sword, for why it would be in the place it was found. There wasn't a grave site there or a tomb. There wasn't a body with it. There weren't other swords around it. And so all they know about this sword is it's a little over 2,000 years old. And so when Ryan approached me with this story, he said, this would make an interesting historical book for kids and for adults that adults can read and enjoy. And so we figured it's going to be about a 32-page book. It's going to have 12 to 15 illustrations in it, full color. And it's going to be not very long. And you figure 32 pages, roughly 6,000 words long. And so I wanted to tell this story about Will Byrd finding this sword. Now, what's interesting, and Ryan and I talked about this, and I talked about it with our financier on this. I said, my plan is to do this. Let's tell the true story of Will Byrd and his discovery of this sword. But at the same time, I'm going to make up, completely out of whole cloth, I'm going to make up a fictional character who was the owner of the sword back during the Gallic Wars. And you'll see that in some of the things I'm going to read for you tonight. You'll hear part of that. And so I've created a fictional backstory for the sword. Now, in telling the story of Will Byrd, I'm also talking about his ghost story, which is a very intriguing story. Now, before I get into it too deeply, again, if you want to get this book, you can look for it online. It's called Ghosts Have Warm Hands, and it's by Will Bird. This is the man who tells this story. This is the man who found the sword in the clay. This is the man who went on after World War I to write many books. He was a writer for 40 years. He didn't pass away until 1984. And so he wrote for all those years, wrote many books. And this is considered to be one of the best little memoirs of World War I. Ghosts Have Warm Hands. There's something I want to read on the back cover of this, but it gives away part of the ghost story. So let me just look and see what comments are here, if I've missed anything essential while we're going on, because I'm doing most of the talking, of course. I see Matt asking Doug how the shop is going. I hope everything's going well for you with the tire business, Doug. Morton Snow, good to see you. You started to draw and paint, trying all acrylic, watercolor, and pencil. Outstanding. Michelle Canham Free, it's so good to see you. A lot of love for you, too. And Matthew Sainsbury, Julius Caesar defeated a Gallic warrior called Vercingetorix. Yes, there's actually a great fictional novel that was read many years ago about Vercingetorix. And I think there was a pretty not well done movie on Vercingetorix, starring the same guy who was in the Highlander, the original Highlander movie, Christopher Lambert. He played Vercingetorix in a movie many years ago. But yeah, it was a great story. If you look up Vercingetorix, and we used to have a shirt when we did shirts for Three Celts and Company back 25 years ago with Vercingetorix on it. But Vercingetorix was the one that tried to unify all the clans against Julius Caesar, and eventually, at the Battle of Alesia, he finally had to surrender. And that pretty much ended the Gallic Wars for Caesar. So it's good stuff. It's great history. And so, yeah, I'm the only one actually talking. And, if anybody wants to add to any of this, you can call in. But let me get through the ghost story first. So let's do that, since we're 23 minutes into this. And I've just been giving background. Let's get into this story. Hey, Sean Stroik. Good to see you. Because this is a great story. So what I'm going to do, if you don't mind, I am going to, now Ryan has seen most of this. I'm not going to read everything I've written on this so far. The book is not done. It's not gone through any final edits by any means. But I've included the story of Will Bird. I've included the story of his ghost story, which leads up to his finding the sword. I haven't even hit the finding of the sword yet in the book. But I also started writing about the backstory of this fictional character that I've created for the owner of the Roman sword back during the Gallic Wars, since there's nothing else about him. And so here we go. Take a break, says Leslie, and then start the book. How about that? I wasn't even going to take a break, but let's do it. I'm going to go ahead and we'll just play a little thing here just for fun. Few seconds, 30 seconds. You'll recognize it. And then we'll get into the ghost story. So here we go. Stand by, folks.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad, so he can take me to Disneyland.
You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. Thanks for that suggestion, Leslie, to take a little break. And I just sat here and stared at the screen till it was all back on. So welcome back, folks. We're doing a little show tonight, the Intrepid radio program ad hoc. And it is involving some ghost stories. One in particular that we're going to get to. We may or may not get to any more. And it's really to let you know a little bit about the book that I'm putting together and the story of this guy, Will Bird, who wrote this book after World War I called Ghosts Have Warm Hands. And the book wasn't originally supposed to be a ghost story, but we include his story in this book. And he had a ghost experience, 2 of them. And he went on after World War I to write many books and was a writer for about 40 years. But this little book, Ghosts Have Warm Hands by Will Bird, B-I-R-D, you might want to go look that up and see if you can pick up a copy, especially after this tonight. So here we go. I'm going to read parts of this little book that I'm putting together. Ryan Gale is the person who got me to do this, and he's acting as my technical advisor, my historical advisor. And we both love history. We were both in the Royal, or the 42nd Royal Highlanders together. And so this is the story of Will Bird, who in 1917 at Amiens, France, after the battle had cleared, was walking through the trenches and then all the churned up mud and clay, found an old Roman sword, a gladius. And specialists dated that sword back to the time of Caesar's Gallic Wars. But that's all they knew about it. Didn't know, there was nothing else around it, no tombs, no graves, no nothing. And so in this little book where I'm writing this story, I thought it would be interesting to create the fictional owner of the sword back during the time of Caesar's Gallic Wars. So here we go. I'm going to start out reading you this text. And people say, well, how can you do that? Let us buy the book and read it. I'm going to read this to you. By the time the book is out, you're going to want to read it yourself. So tentatively, we entitled this book The Sword in the Clay. And it was supposed to be a play off of The Sword in the Stone, even though it has nothing to do with the rightful king of Britain or anything like that. And so here's how the book starts, all right? And the ghost story starts very quickly. And remember, there's 2 facets to this ghost story in this book. So it starts with the first facet. Here we go. Word number 1 in the book. It's 1915. The world has gone mad and is at war with itself. Bright young men from nearly every country have enlisted in their various armies and gone off to fight and serve. Many never came home from this war to end all wars. Steve Bird was one of them. Shattered to pieces by a German mine, he would never again see the green rolling hills and rocky coastlines of home. Nova Scotia had truly lost one of its finest boys, and East Mapleton one of its favorite, now honored sons. Even more close to heart and home, Will Bird had lost his youngest brother, and though he honored his sacrifice, he was gutted to the core. William Richard Bird, Will to his family and friends, had been working on a farm in Saskatchewan, Canada, nearly 2,500 miles from home, when a telegram bearing news of his little brother's death reached him. He was shocked and devastated, as just a few days before, while working out in the wheat fields, he had seen what seemed to be a ghostly apparition of his brother Steve, dressed in his 42nd Battalion uniform. Will had blinked hard, and his brain quickly dismissed the vision as a play of sunlight and shadow, though now he was not so sure it hadn't been real. When Steve had enlisted, he assured his brother that he would fight bravely and live to return home. "But," Steve had said to Will, "if I do not make it home from a war, maybe I'll find a way sometime to come and whisper in your ear." Or perhaps, as it might seem, visit him in the rays of sunlight glinting off a wheat field in the Saskatchewan outback. Upon reading the telegram, Will immediately dropped his harvesting tools and hopped a train back to East Mapleton, Nova Scotia. Being away from his home was bad enough, but the harvesting money was pretty good, and he had hoped to return home with $300, a goodly sum for a season's work in 1915. But none of that mattered now. Steve was gone, and his death threw a black shroud over the excitement and exuberance Will had possessed when he first left on what became known nationally as the Harvest Excursion to Western Canada. Life back home in East Mapleton had been good, sweet, and quaintly provincial, but after pneumonia took his father, Will decided that the best thing to do was to go west, harvesting crops on the wild prairies to help earn money to support his family and widowed mother. A year earlier, his brother Steve had left his draftsman trade and enlisted in the Canadian Expeditionary Force to fight in the burgeoning conflict in Europe as a proud young man willing to die for his country. These were the times in which the Great War broke out in Europe. For decades, nations had been posturing themselves as the strongest, smartest, and most superior, and young men flocked to the militaries to put their own love of country and personal prowess on display. And might I add a note here, as I was reading on this era, men back in that time, young men who went to war in World War I, many of them thought this was the thing to do. They didn't go anticipating death on the battlefield, although many knew they might not return. They went because it was adventure. It was something great to do, something amazing to do. And they wanted that in their on their personal resume, so to speak. I adventured with the lads back in Burma, type of thing. And so Will could not enlist at the time, and we get into that a little bit. But this was the first phase of this ghost story. He saw his brother because Will could not enlist. He was rejected. He had broken some teeth playing hockey, and they wouldn't let him enlist unless he got those fixed. Must have been a very different world back in 1915, even 100 years ago. And so to raise money for his family and so on, he went west to Saskatchewan and worked in the wheat fields out there. Let me continue reading here. The train ride over the great expanse of Canadian prairie was already long enough, but with it costing nearly every penny of the $40 he had earned so far, and with the shadow of Steve's death hanging heavy over his head, Will's trip back home seemed an eternity. He just wanted it to be done and over. But as the time clickety-clacked away, Will had the opportunity to decide what he would do next. Work in Nova Scotia was lean, But the government needed men to enlist in the army to fight with their allies against the Central Powers of Europe. It seems a Serbian patriot shot and killed the Archduke of Austria, and within a month the Austrian army invaded Serbia. The Great War had begun and eventually drew every European country and its allies into the fray, including Will's brother, Steve. By the time he disembarked the train back home in Nova Scotia, Will had determined to honor his brother and his country by taking Steve's place. He enlisted with the Canadian Expeditionary Forces, the 42nd Battalion Black Watch of Canada, and nearly 6 months to the day after Steve's death, with his bonnet on his head and his kilt about his knees, Will set foot for the first time on French soil. Will Byrd had originally attempted to enlist in 1914 alongside his brother Steve at the outbreak of the war, but he had been turned down due to his hockey teeth, which he had broken while participating in Canada's favorite sport. Will had tried to sign up a second time, but was rejected due to Steve's insistence that his brother not also be allowed to submit himself to the life-threatening, dangerous rigors of war. Will was not happy about this, and he had tried to enlist a third time while living in Saskatchewan, thinking his long distance from Nova Scotia would offer him a bit of anonymity from his prior recruiting post back home. But he was wrong and was turned down for a third time. As a direct result of Steve's death, Will was finally permitted to enlist and joined up, as he insisted out of duty and honor, self-sacrifice, discipline, and obedience. For most young men, however, stepping into foreign war for the first time, the military was considered to be an adventure. And in Canada, part of the British Empire's United Kingdom, the glory was all for God, King, and country, along with a dash of bravado. For Will's part, he believed he owed it to his lost brother. Now, that's the first part of the story. I have children here just raging on the perimeter, wanting to say hello. So, Ellery, what can I do for you? What can I do for you?
I wanted you to read tonight.
Okay, I'm on radio right now, so maybe we'll read when I'm done. Okay?
This is the book you have to read. Judy B. Jones.
All right, you got it.
We're on chapter 2, Jingle.
Say hi to everybody, Ellie. And there's Rowan.
I was not ready to say hi. I was laying on the ground.
You were fine.
I was laying on the
You were
ground
fine.
throwing Lucy's Santa Claus all over.
There you go.
Rabbits go
People
moo.
are saying hello to you guys. Rabbits go moo? They do? Okay, how about you go scram? You go over to your bedroom. And I'll be in when I'm done with this show.
I'll
All
be
right?
right here.
Okay. See you guys. No, I want you to go.
I love you.
I love you too. Mwah. You're my beautiful. I spank your butt. Good night. Come here.
Hi.
Good night.
Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer.
I don't get scared, says Michelle. Okay, out. Out now. Let's not be obnoxious. Let's go. Because I asked you to.
Well, I'm going to bed anyways.
All right, good night.
I don't have
Both
to.
of you, good night. All right, there you go, folks. Familial interludes. Unavoidable. I think the best I could do is probably beat them for interrupting, but, that's no good either. So you tell them, you work on it, and life has not changed. So there you go. Michelle Cannon Free, Hardy Canadian stock. That's right. That wouldn't be a show. Wouldn't be a show, the kids. Without the kids, probably you meant. I just contacted Bree on, says Doug Stack. Sorry, Brianna. I didn't tell you. I went live tonight, by the way. We're only about halfway through, so you're good. Sit back. We just started the story. And sorry, Bree. Say hey to John for me. I thought I tagged you guys in the post. Maybe I didn't. Sorry about that. Mea culpa. All right, let's get back to this story now. Now, remember, I told you this story is about Will Byrd and the true life, the real story of him finding this Roman sword in the mud in 1917 at Amiens, France during World War I. And there was no background to this sword. All the research that the archaeologists and the scientists and the researchers did, they could find no reason other than maybe they think the sword was lost and 2,000 years ago. And it fell off a wagon, or somebody dropped it, or somebody was killed and their body was dragged off and the sword lay in the grass, whatever it was. It lay there for 2,000 years before Will Byrd found it in the mud. Now, we got into the little ghost story that Will wrote after the war. He put down, and for those of you who weren't here, this is the book by Will Byrd, and I want to make sure I don't get the light reflecting off of this so you can actually see it a little better. It's called Ghosts Have Warm Hands by Will Byrd. And he went on for 40 years as a writer after the war. By the way, this is Will and his brother Steve, who we just talked about. And so that was the first part of his ghost story. He saw the ghost of his brother Will when he was working in the wheat fields in Saskatchewan. Now, I told you, while we have the true story of Will Byrd, and many of it in his own words, and I'm just rewriting the story for this book, there is also a story that's missing, and that's the story of the Roman sword. Who owned this? And so I'm going to read to you a bit of the background that I've created for the sword for this book. And I've created a completely, totally fictional character and a fictional set of circumstances set against an accurate historical backsetting of Caesar's Gallic Wars in 53 to 51 BCE. And so this section of the book jumps 2,000 years earlier. And so I want you to hear some of this. Here we go. Ready? Dawn was a golden pink sliver of sky across the eastern horizon, and much to his chagrin, Marius Abruzzo hadn't slept a wink all night. His insomnia wasn't born of any fear or dreaded harbinger, but of excitement and enthusiasm. Today, he and his two younger brothers were to leave their home in the rugged interior country of central Italia to the Roman city of Pentima, and there join the armies of Julius Caesar, who was launching a campaign to quell the rebellious Gauls to the north. He lay most of the night staring into the dark ceiling above his bed, his mind engulfed with the things of family, honor, duty, and valor. His parents' vineyards and wheat fields were well manned with Grecian slaves, all of whom lived what Marius thought was a pretty decent life, despite having no personal rights or Roman citizenship. But all the same, they seemed to bear some good loyalty to his kindly father, and would themselves benefit from the estate running smoothly and profitably. Marius quickly dismissed from his mind any notion of hardship for his parents over the absence of their three sons. Besides, they would more than likely serve bravely and bring heaps of honorous glory to the family name. Marius sat upright out of bed, kissed his fingertips, and touched them to the head of the small earthen deity that sat on the low stand beside his bed. Rolling the figurine god into a swath of soft cloth, he looped it with a leather tie and tucked it into his travel bag. He left the door to his room open and strode across the garden atrium to the common room with the green-tiled floor, where his two brothers, Luigius and Cestus, were already offering up farewells to their parents. Mother was shedding tears, but the paterfamilias seemed rather stoic until Marius clasped his forearm in a somewhat formal farewell. In a sudden fluid rush of emotion, the Abruzzo patriarch brushed away Marius's hand and drew his son in tightly, grasping him around with both arms. After a long moment, he held his eldest son out at arm's length, locked his eyes with Marius's eyes, and said, "Velis et remus, my son." With sail and with oars, was his father's old way of telling Marius to give all he had to what he was about to undertake. He then drew in Luigius and Cestus and hugged them with the strength of a bear, reminding them both of the times he would wrestle them to the ground and race them to the stables. Marius joined in, and the four of them stood in a circle with arms locked around each other's shoulders. Mother would get her loving goodbyes soon enough, but this was a moment for the Abruzzo boys. They stood circled in their locked huddle for several minutes, heads against heads, and they all began to build into laughter. Father said with finality, "For glory and honor, my sons." They each repeated their father's words, "For glory and honor, Father." And in the outer court, three horses laden with the brothers' gear were quietly waiting in the early morning sun. Before the Abruzzo brothers mounted for their journey to Pentima, Marius stopped in his tracks and quietly told his brothers to be silent and still for a moment. "Look around you, my brothers," Marius almost whispered. "This is our land, our place, our home." The three stood together in silence and gazed in a broad arc around the place where they stood, taking it all in as if for the last time. Quietly, Marius drew his sword from its sheath, a finely crafted Roman gladius, pointed it to the sky, then turned and plunged it into the ground between the three of them. He stooped down and picked up a handful of the rich black soil and rubbed it into his hands, nodding to his brothers to do the same. Putting his hand on the pommel of his gladius, he said, "Give me your hands, brothers," and they did. Luigius placing his hand first atop Marius's hand, then finally Cestus doing the same atop Luigius's hand. Marius looked them in the eyes. "Cum vita mea et sanguine meo et anima mea," Marius said to them, with power and authority. "With my life and my blood and my soul," the brothers repeated to Marius. "We shall never leave each other's side," Marius continued, "and we will protect each other with all our strength and all the strength of the gods until the day we return home." Luigius and Cestus heartily repeated the vow, their hands all clasped atop each other, the sword of Marius atop the soil of their home. And with that, Marius sheathed his sword, and the brothers Abruzzo mounted their horses and turned to the north, where the encampment of Julius Caesar sprawled across the Pentima Valley, bristling with the power of military genius, the raw energy of conquest, and the pure lifeblood of adventure. Now there's where we had the introduction of Marius Abruzzo, the owner seems wrong. He's the one who, it was his sword that I am fictionalizing as the sword that was found later, 2,000 years later, by Will Bird. Now, this next section is the rest of the ghost story. And this is, again, what Will Bird wrote about. These are, I could have repeated his own words, but why? I'm writing a book about his story. And so I'm trying to put a little more meat on the bones for you. You can read his account in his own book, Ghosts Have Warm Hands, that he wrote after the war, 3 years after the war, I believe. And this section of the book, because there's not really chapters, I call The Bond of Brothers. It's 1917. A year has passed since Will Bird joined the 42nd Battalion, the Black Watch, a nearly legendary regiment of the British Army that the Germans had dubbed Ladies from Hell. The moniker is most likely due to the kilts the battalion wore while charging into battle to the droning blare of their bagpipes. The Germans hated these guys. Since the beginning of the war, the German army had successfully held a 4.5-mile-long escarpment known as Vimy Ridge. Will and the Canadian forces needed to take that high ground away from the German army, and over 3 days, they slowly made their way up the ridge. Now, by the way, let me just add a note here, folks. As I'm writing some of this history, I didn't want to bog the book down with detailed history. Good night. Thank you. I didn't want to bog it down with the details of the history. I didn't want it to become a history book. I wanted this to be a book about Will Bird and the history, though I have to recite some of it. And so I want you to know some of the history. So when I say in 3.5 days they took Vimy Ridge, I can say that in 2 seconds when there have been whole books written on Vimy Ridge. And so let's continue on. Will and the Canadian forces needed to take that high ground away from the German army, and over 3 days they slowly made their way up the ridge. A constant bombardment of German shells were thrown over the heads of the advancing Allied forces as Will and 2 of his fellow soldiers spent their grueling days digging trenches and laying barbed wire close to the front lines of the fighting. It was well past midnight on the second day when Will was too exhausted to do anything more of any good. So they ended their shift and threw themselves into a cold, muddy trench in an attempt to get some sleep. Winter was barely past, and the night air bore with it that feeling of being too warm for winter, yet too cold for spring. The mud and the clay were churned up, and the best one could do was wrap up in their trench coat and hug themselves for warmth while dreaming of a warm day in a sunny Nova Scotian wheat field back home. Will had seen better days, to be sure, but he was simply too tired to think much about it, and he fell fast asleep beneath a sheet fastened to the ground to help ward off the cold and retain some semblance of warmth for himself and his 2 fellow soldiers. At some point in the night, the wind took the corner of the ground sheet and whipped it free. It brushed across Will's face and woke him. In that same moment, a warm hand grasped his right hand and pulled at him, while another warm hand grabbed his left and yanked him to his feet. A bit startled to wakefulness, Will thought it was one of his comrades who pulled him up, but when he got a look into the face of his dead-of-the-night visitor, it was someone much more familiar. It was Steve. His little brother Steve, for 2 years ago. This was no stupor-induced delusion or fitful, freakish nightmare brought on by the rigors of battle. It was a live and in-the-moment real person. Steve, dressed in a clean, crisp uniform, leaned into Will and spoke softly with brotherly familiarity. "Gather up your gear," Steve whispered. "Follow me." He paused for a moment, then turned and started down the trench with some sense of urgency. Will was simply too shocked to speak. He did as his brother asked and grabbed his gear and followed Steve through the trenches and makeshift shelters constructed by other soldiers from his platoon. At one point, Will lost grip and dropped the gear he had thrown over his shoulder, and when he stooped down to pick it up, he saw Steve several paces ahead enter a passageway off the trench. Will quickly threw his gear back over his shoulder and hurriedly followed after Steve into the passageway, but his brother was nowhere to be seen. The passageway split to the left and the right, but Will had no idea in which direction his brother had gone. He decided to turn to the right to try to catch up to his brother. He couldn't see him, so he doubled back and went to the left. Still, he could not find him. Steve had vanished completely. Tired and now sweating, Will leaned up against a wall in the passageway, overtaken by exhaustion, and standing there upright, his face against the muddy wall, he fell back to sleep. Hang on, I gotta take a little drink. "What are you doing here?" a voice cracked out of the dark, snapping Will abruptly out of his sleep. He was still standing against the wall of the passageway, his gear still flung over his shoulder. A fellow soldier from his platoon was shaking him. "What are you doing here, man?" the soldier repeated. Will hadn't yet come to his full senses to answer the question when the soldier told him that the trench where Will had been sleeping with the other 2 soldiers had been hit directly by a German shell. They were working at digging it out, but all they could find was bits of equipment, gear, and bloody body parts. Only a few minutes earlier, that may have been Will's arms and legs found in the debris. His dead brother, Steve, had saved his life. Will was stunned. He told the soldier and eventually the rest of his platoon about the visitation from his brother, who had woken him, pulled him to his feet, and led him away from where he'd been sleeping. No one was sure what to believe, and many of the lads were skeptical, thinking Will had walked off in his sleep and dreamt the whole thing. Was that truly the spirit of my brother? Will asked himself. Did he possess some providential foreknowledge that I would die in that muddy trench? Will pushed his pondering out of his mind. All he knew for sure was that Steve was watching over him and had found some way to wake him, pull him to his feet with warm hands, and whisper something in his ear. The very next day, the Allies went on to take Vimy Ridge. Will celebrated with his fellow soldiers, and their victory marked an auspicious day in the war. It was the first battle in which all the Canadian Expeditionary Forces fought in one place. It became a symbol of the unified effort that would lead them on to eventually win the war. Will continued to fight on till the end of the war with the 42nd Battalion, and in the days to come would make a discovery of great historical significance. And then that launches into the next section called Samarabriva, the place of the river bridge. It jumps back 2,000 years. So that is the ghost story of Will Bird. That was his brother, whom he believes came to visit him in the wheat fields in Saskatchewan, and then again in the trenches at Vimy Ridge. And what do you think of that, guys? What do you think of that story? I think I've heard other stories like this before, where ghosts have come and brought somebody they loved to the attention of something that was happening and either saved their lives or something. Do ghosts have the ability then? Do they exist outside of time? Do they have the ability to see the future? Are they outside of linear time so they can come back and enter in? I firmly believe in their existence. I think as many of us do. But this is what Will was left with. His brother, who, remember, and it was on the back cover of this book, his brother said to him before he went off to war, before he was killed, if I don't come back, maybe I'll find a way sometime to come back and whisper in your ear. Which is what happened. The ghost woke him with warm hands and whispered, follow me. Pick up your gear and follow me. And led him away from that trench and then vanished. So it's an interesting story. Now, if you'd all like, I've got one more section of this book that I've written. Doesn't even get up to the sword yet and what's going to happen with it, but it jumps back to the Abruzzo brothers and puts a little more meat on the bones. Do you want to hear that? Because I'm right here. It's not a finished section, but it's the section I'm named. I already read to you, Samarabriva, the place of the river bridge. So here we go. Thank you, Leslie. I figured I'd get some positives. So here we go. This is the next section. Now we jump back in time to Marius Abruzzo, who is the fictional character I've created to be the one whose sword was found. Here it goes. All right. And this is the last section I've got written so far. It doesn't get into the discovery of the sword yet and wrapping this all up. And there's a little surprise that'll be at the end of the book that I don't want to tell you about. It's not a surprise. It's the way I'm going to end the book, I think, will tie all of this together. So this is a book about brotherly bonds. Brotherly, it can be sisterly. It's about the bonds of siblings. And so here we go. The next section. Luigius, Cestus! Marius called out for his brothers as he rode down the main barracks lane of Julius Caesar's winter camp at Samara Breva. I have news! Over the last 6 years since the beginning of their service to Caesar's army, the brothers Abruzzo had spent every day leaping from stew pot to fire and back again. Caesar's invasion of Gaul was a massive military undertaking, and sometimes the fighting was intense, while other times it was simply devastating and harsh. The brothers had been honed to warrior perfection, and their reputation among the other legionaries earned them the nickname Aprutium Lupi, the Wolves of Abruzzo. Luigius and Cestus stood to their feet at a cook fire 2/3 of the way down the lane as Marius rode to meet them at a restrained gallop. They'd been fighting together for 6 years, but Marius had emerged as the natural-born leader among the three. And they all knew it, and all respected the working of nature's indefatigable laws in regard to their eldest brother. How'd the council go? Asked Cestus. And what's with the fancy helmet? He exclaimed in amusement while reaching for the reins of the horse as it spun in a circle. Marius dismounted in a flourish, leg over saddle, leaping to the ground. He pointed a finger up to the broad plume of red feathers spanning across his helmet from side to side, and smiled while puffing out his chest and raising his chin just a bit. He paused, placing his hand on the pommel of his sword, looking at his brother square in the eyes, am your new centurion. What? Luigius and Cestus shouted almost in unison. How did that happen? Asked Cestus. Doesn't it usually take a good 10 years to reach the rank of centurion? Did you have to get down on your knees and personally kiss Caesar's boots for that? Asked Luigius, laughing. Cestus joined him. I originally had written, did you have to personally get down on your knees and kiss Caesar's arse for that helmet? But I thought since kids will be reading this, I tamed it down. Kiss his boots. So there you go. Laugh away, brothers, Marius replied as he shoved them both to the ground while he emphasized the word brothers. But this is deadly serious business. He then extended his hands to both his youngers and hefted them back to their feet. Marius was a broad, muscular man, and at nearly 6 foot tall, he was practically a giant among Romans. Remember last season when we fought to defend Cicero's encampment against the Nervi under Pullo and Varenus at the camp of Cicero? How could we forget, replied Cestus. Those 2 centurions were at each other's throats almost as badly as the Gauls were at ours. Healthy rivalry, added Luigius. They were both loyal to each other and to Caesar, just in deep competition with one another. Well, their rivalry kept us alive, the 3 of us included, Marius emphasized. Despite the loss of many legionaries and centurions and the barbarism of the Nervi, we all fought valiantly and bravely under them. And that's why they gave you the new hat? Mused Cestus. Indeed, Marius said, mildly contemplative. That's why they gave me the new hat. I've been elevated to centurion for meritorious conduct on the field of battle, and you 2 are to be my optios. You will enforce my orders, take over my command in battle should the need arise, supervise my subordinates, and, he added jokingly, become rather like my slaves for all practical purposes. They all laughed then, stood to attention, when Marius thrust his arm out in front of him, fingers splayed, palm down, stacking their hands atop each other's as they had done the day they left their father's estate. They all said together, for Rome and for glory. Marius removed his helmet, set it on the tree stump stool, and suddenly all business said, the orders are on us. Here is our mission. Marius went on to give the details of their orders. Apparently one of the Gallic tribal chieftains, a man named Indutiomarus, had given his word to support Caesar against the other Gallic tribes in exchange for him being able to keep his title, his lands, his power. However, Indutiomarus went back on his word and started raising a new army of Gauls to revolt against the Roman army and Julius Caesar. And he is now moving that army in revolt against Caesar, continued Marius, by marching them here to Samara Breva in an attempt to crush Caesar's wintering army. Remember, just a reminder, where Wilbert finds the sword is at Amiens, France. And Samara Breva is the old name for what became Amiens, France. So, how many men does the Gaul have? Asked Cestus. By our latest estimate, they have nearly 60,000 men, answered Marius flatly. We have what? Louis just paused, counting in his head. 3 legions? 12,000 men at best? That's 5 of them to each one of us, chimed in Cestus, who quipped, We're Romans. We can take them. Caesar has a plan, Marius went on. We draw all our troops into the camp as tightly as possible, making us seem even smaller than we actually are. Indutiomarus will lay siege, and we will let them continue to believe we are little more than an outpost, waiting them out. Then Marius revealed that Caesar expressed liking nothing better than to see Indutiomarus hunted down, captured, and executed. This part of the plan he had placed squarely on Marius's shoulders, a direct mission given to Marius personally by none other than Julius Caesar himself. His brothers went completely silent, sat back, and Cestus let out a long exhale of air that turned into an even longer whistle. In just a few short weeks, Indutiomarus and his army lay siege to Samara Breva. His army dug trenches, built siege towers, shot flaming missiles and volleys of arrows into Caesar's camp, all things they had learned from the Romans. He had expected a much larger Roman presence, but from the looks of this camp on the river bank before him, he believed he had missed the main force and began to wonder at the greater or lesser significance of defeating whomever waited inside. At the very least, he knew he could use this action as a bit of propaganda to draw more of the Gallic chieftains to his support. And that's all I've written so far. So there we go. There it is so far. Hey, Dave Potter. And in flailing my arms, I hit my microphone. So there is the story so far. There was our ghost story contained within this story. And again, I want you to, we won't have time. We won't talk about any other ghost stories tonight. But I want to reemphasize, if you want to get this book, I just bought this on Amazon. I was hoping to get an audio copy of it, but not audio, the what's the download for got it right here, a Kindle version of this, but they didn't have it in Kindle. But this is the book. It's written by Will Bird. It's called Ghosts Have Warm Hands. It's the account of him experience. It's really his memoirs of World War I, but included in this is his story, the ghost story of he and his brother, Steve, who came and woke him in the middle of the night and saved his life from a bomb. And, of course, then there's the story of Will Bird finding the Gladius. And the story I've written, filling in the blanks, telling the real story of Will Bird and the fictional story of my guy, Marius Abruzzo, who had this Roman Gladius. Now, I think it'd be really interesting if there was ever a way to know who this sword actually belonged to, but I don't think that will ever come forward. That is a 2,000-year-old story, 2,070 years old. And no one knows how the sword got there, why it was there. There were battles that took place at Samara Breva, or Amiens, Roman battles took place there. It was mostly an outpost of Caesar's, where he left left supplies and 3 legions, which is 12,000 men. So perhaps it was just a sword, that was dropped or lost in the field. And the only battle that took place there with the Romans, as far as we know, is when the Gallic chief laid siege to the outpost, thinking it was a much smaller outpost than it was, and losing miserably, by the way. So there you go. There's the story. And I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you enjoyed the ghost story portion of that. Might come back maybe next Friday. We'll do another ghost story. I don't want to overdo it for now. Well, what is next? Is next Friday? Is next Friday actually Christmas Eve? What day is Christmas Eve? If today is the 17th, I've only been asked by my kids 100 times, and I've given them the answer 100 times. So Christmas Eve is going to be it's next Friday. So I won't come back next Friday. How about that? But sometime in the near future, I'll come back and we'll do some more ghost stories on Fridays. And Dave, that's all there is. Dude, no more. Thank you, Barbie D. And thank you, everybody. Leslie, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I probably read more of the book than I was going to. When I originally onset, I just wanted to read the sections of the ghost story. But think about that too. Isn't that an intriguing story? Wouldn't that make a great movie, Dave Potter? Wouldn't that make a great movie? Will Byrd finding this sword in 1917 in the trenches, churned up clay, and finding it's a 2,000-year-old sword that belongs to God knows who. And it's in a museum in Halifax right now, I believe. So intriguing indeed. Yep, Leslie Hooker said Christmas Eve. Let's see. Doug Stack has a huge outpost. That's right. So Barbie D says TMI for my eyes here, kids. I'm missing the TMI. I'm not sure what I missed there, but is the name of the book a ghost story? Leslie, no, it's not. So far, I've tentatively entitled the book The Sword in the Clay, which was supposed to be, in my head, it was a play off The Sword in the Stone, which has nothing, this has nothing to do with King Arthur. It has nothing to do with a kingly, a watery bint. Watery bints handing out swords, but nothing like that. But so that's the working title I've got it under right now. And missed you too, Sean Stroik. Glad you made it here tonight. And so I'm glad you all made it here tonight. I was just looking to see if there is anything else here. So if you want to read this ghost story for yourself, I'm not going to post this text anywhere that I wrote. You can get his book, Ghosts Have Warm Hands by Will Byrd. And you can find it on Amazon. And there's not many of them out there, but I think you can find it. So it sells probably through a reseller, is my guess from the look of this. It's got a sticker on the back with a new barcode on it. So there it is. I think I only bought it for a few bucks, maybe $12 or something like that. So there it is. It's a small book, Memoirs of Will Byrd. And it has been said of Will Byrd's book that this book, even though he wrote many books, he wrote several accounts of things that happened in World War I. And then he went on to write about other things, of course, over the years. But it was said that this book, Ghosts Have Warm Hands, is one of the best memoirs to have emerged after World War I. So there you go. All right, guys. There you go. Leslie Hooker put it up. There's the link right there in the chat room. Ghosts Have Warm Hands. So, folks, I want to thank you for joining me tonight. Hopefully there'll be more of these coming up. I know in the not too distant future, there will be news of what could very possibly happen with this show. And sorry, Leslie, I see what you meant. You were talking about the name of the book. Well, we got it all cleared up. So stay tuned. We'll have more information coming up. And about that, I want to thank you all for chiming in, pitching in, coming in, watching the show. And hopefully we'll have more to come. So you all have a good night. And if I don't see any of you, at least in this form, before Christmas, have a wonderful and Merry Christmas. And you know what, folks, by the way, I want you to live long and prosper.